going to try to get through most of this book, but yeah, the interesting method of the Facebook Live capture is spotty sometimes, but I want to acknowledge that it's a really good tool for people where it's like there's save the video until it can't anymore. So it's nice to have kind of like anything that you put up there is I guess secured. Anyways, that's a technical fascination that I will get into at another time. And back to page 10 of this book. Okay, we'll start from the sentence. Okay. In the wake of trauma, the and dysregulated impulsive behavior held by young parts. What gets processed? Modern views on memory emphasize its unstable nature. That is, the brain seems to be organized to update and rewrite past experiences, integrating them with prior and subsequent events. Rather than focusing on desensitizing the event memories, experts neuroscientifically informed view of traumatized clients. The treatment begins with education for the therapist on the nature of trauma and dissociation, geared to explain the symptoms with which a client struggles and to provide information to reassure him or her that these are normal, logical responses to trauma. The therapy involve the therapist attuned building of a collaboration based on what the client needs, not just on what he or she wants. To create a new story about whom he or she is in the aftermath of the painful and traumatic events requires learning new habits of observation and discovery. The op-ed stories clients have been writing about themselves have been biased, but not in their favor. Or aversion, identifying with the feeling of fighting, judging it, are an essential part of finding in equanimity, equanimity, a state of calm, peacefulness, and composure. Translated into psychotherapy, this practice helps clients learn to tolerate and accept even the most painful, humiliating, or frightening emotions and sensations. Rather than beginning with an exploration of the old world, of painful, humiliating experiences and overwhelming feelings, the therapist is encouraged to focus on increasing the client's curiosity and interest in feeling states, parts, thoughts, and body responses. The goal is frequently associated with trauma. These are introduced to clients in diagram form to help them focus attention and take in this new information with greater interest and curiosity. Another approach to increasing awareness of parts activity is to ask clients to assume that all distressing thoughts, feelings, and body responses are communications from trauma-related parts. This assumption is consistent with split brain neuroscience findings on the activity and abilities associated with each of the two hemispheres. Teaching schemas that facilitate sowing the seeds of compassion focuses on interventions that begin a process of fostering the increased self-understanding and self-compassion so necessary for healing. Asked to have compassion for themselves or to better care for themselves, most traumatized clients have a strong negative reaction. But when an emotion such as fear or shame is connected to the felt sense of a young child, the same client can often feel empathy or even indignation for that child. In mindfulness-based treatment, it is not necessary that we differentiate between compassion for ourselves versus compassion for the child. The felt emotional and somatic sensations of compassion are the same. No matter who is the intended receiver, it is those sensations of compassion that help to soothe and heal traumatic and attachment wounding. It is also not necessary to have detailed narrative memory of the client's traumatic experience. It is only necessary for the client to have a felt sense of what the child part has been through. Having a sense or synopsis of the client's trauma history allows the therapist and client to acknowledge what younger selves have been through without overwhelming the client's nervous system or capacity for affect tolerance. Acknowledging the client's nervous system or capacity for affect tolerance. So, acknowledging the part's traumatic experiences feels validating without triggering traumatic reactions. At this stage of the work, the emphasis is on cultivating compassion for the parts, one by one. Compassion is challenged by overwhelming emotions or disturbing body responses. The goal is to help the client feel just enough of the part suffering that empathy is evoked. It is important for the therapist to remember that in trauma treatment, feeling too much interferes with empathy and compassion as much as feeling too little. At this stage, clients are also taught to recognize blending or identifying with their parts, making them vulnerable to being flooded or acting out the impulse of some sort, and to practice unblending and disidentifying. In Chapter 6, Complications of Treatment, Traumatic Attachment, we address the internal conflicts and struggles created by a history of traumatic attachment. If the hallmark of traumatic attachment is a reversal of roles in which the object of safety, the parent figure, becomes the object of fear and life threat, any intimate relationship thereafter, even therapy, evokes danger signals. Growing closeness in relationship can convey threat or promise of comfort and connection, evoking memories of the longing for an attachment figure that never came alongside implicit memories of the abandonment and betrayal that did happen. Because attachment and fear have become intertwined in the client's experience, a therapy focused on the narrative memories on the transference is likely to ignite an internal struggle between the hunger for closeness in young attachment-seeking parts and their fear of abandonment, versus the defensive responses of fight, flight, and total submission. In dissociative disorder clients with parts that are more disconnected and autonomous, this internal struggle becomes even more easily activated in personal relationships or in the therapy, harder to decode or deconstruct, and more difficult to manage behaviorally. How therapists anticipate this phenomenon and how they help their clients accept and work with it can lead to either deeper healing or reopening of attachment wounds in the therapy itself. Either clinging or devaluing is interpreted as an interpersonal issue between client and therapist. They are often exacerbated. If we understand them as intrapersonal, indicators of an internal attachment disorder still operating within the client, then the therapist can be an ally for both sides of the struggle and a facilitator of earned, secure attachment. In earned, secure attachment, the insecure or disorganized attachment of childhood and or adulthood is resolved to the point that individuals can reflect on their early attachment relationships without becoming dysregulated, without idealizing or demonizing their attachment figures, and feeling a sense of acceptance. In this model, earned secure attachment is the outcome of the client's growing ability to bond with their own young wounded selves as innocent children who deserved the loving care of a compassionate adult, but never received it. Rather than the therapeutic focus of being centered on the attachment to the therapist, the emphasis is consistently on building empathy and attunement to the parts. My nose really itches, sorry about that. Okay. In Chapter 7, working with suicidal, self-destructive, eating disordered, and addicted parts, unsafe and high-risk behaviors are recontextualized as manifestations of parts-related animal defense survival responses. Addictive, eating disordered, suicidal, and self-injurious behaviors are all reinterpreted through a neurobiological lens. The neurobiological premise assumes that human bodies have the same self-righting, self-healing tendencies as do the bodies of other mammalian species. If that is so, then self-destructive behavior must also have a self-righting intention. Viewed in this way, unsafe behavior, historically labeled as self-destructive, can be better understood as a desperate attempt to survive, a way to tolerate shame, rage, fear, and to inhibit flashbacks and nightmares, or to use endogenous or exogenous substances to regulate a traumatized nervous system. As part of an informal, clinically oriented pilot project offering new forms of treatment to trauma patients in a Connecticut Department of Mental Health system, participating clinicians have been gathering informal data on what precedes the same indicators characteristic of parasympathetic responses following a fight or flight response. Historically, parasympathetic responses. Historically, this classic post-traumatic unsafe behavior has been interpreted clinically as attention-seeking, manipulation, or avoidance. With implementation of this neurobiologically informed approach in which patients are helped to reframe impulsive or unsafe behavior as communications from a part driven by the animal defense of fight, the frequency of unsafe behavior has diminished. By internalizing teaching these clients the basic skills outlined in chapters 4 and 5, asking them to practice their use seems to have a stabilizing effect in and of itself. In addition, clients are given psychoeducation about the biological effects of their unsafe behavior and how it works to regulate the nervous system, helping them to gain a perspective on the body's role in these issues. As their ability to unblend from impulsive parts increases, there is a more access to an uninhibited prefrontal cortex. These clients are better able to notice the parts' distressing emotions and unsafe impulses and regulate them rather than react to them. Oh, my nose is so itchy, I'm sorry. Okay. In chapter 8, treatment challenges. The ability for continuous consciousness, the ability to know moment to moment who I am, to make coherent choices and decisions and carry them through completion, to manage impulses, to have accurate perceptions of cause, effect, or time and space, and to integrate the traumatic past in the normal, safe present. Clients with dissociative disorders are often underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed, despite their statistically significant dissociative symptomatology. Most often, they present with diagnoses of borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder 2, and ADD or ADHD. This chapter reviews the diagnostic signs indicating a possible DID diagnosis and discussing assessment of based. It tends to be stabilizing for clients to facilitate deconstructing problems encountered in normal life as well as trauma-related issues. The language of parts allows both client and therapist to keep in mind the central challenge of working with dissociative disorders. And defensive responses. To feel empathy for each part's plight while not losing sight of the fact that the client is an adult with functional capabilities is a mental ability that has to be practiced before it can become second nature. With dissociative disorders, the therapist is working with clients who are not an integrated he or she. Viewing them as such is often confusing rather than helpful, just as viewing clients as inner children without adult resources equally causes confusion. The duality of whole and part, or a whole with parts, is often front and center in DID treatment. When the therapist asks the client to distinguish the parts responsible for a problem behavior, then becomes curious about their emotions, beliefs, motives, and defensive responses he or she engages by cultivating the growing attunement between child selves and grown-up normal life self. Each aspect of self feels an increasing comfort in the other's presence, greater safety, and a warmth and connection. But in order to foster attachment bonds between traumatized individuals and their younger selves, the therapist first must help clients acknowledge, connect, and identify with the normal life adult inside themselves. The self that has the ability to care for and express caring. Client's ability to feel connected, even to strengths that they are aware they possessed. They are aware they possess. Got distracted. Okay, here we go. Perhaps it was unsafe as a child to have strength or a desire for mastery without traumatic consequences. The parts may be triggered by normal life activities, such as a job, a partner relationship, responsibilities, or simply having to be visible, undermining the client's ability to handle them. Internal conflicts between parts may debilitate or destabilize the normal life self or block attempts at developing a life after trauma. Using the clinical examples to illustrate how the therapist can foster the innate compassion of the normal life self on behalf of wounded child parts, the reader is given a template for how internal acceptance is built by drawing on the client's strengths and life experiences resources for the young child selves. While the left brain self has been learning and storing competencies, these abilities have not been available to the right brain selves. This chapter illustrates interventions that bring the two sides into contact and evoke pleasurable moments of attunement and togetherness that become the building blocks of internal secure attachment. The human brain their implicit memories of inadequate bonding and failed trust that both increase the yearning to trust but also increase hypervigilant resistance to trusting. The therapist consistently asks the client on behalf of the parts to communicate, collaborate, and extend compassion to them, slowly building up a felt sense of internal attachment figure. One who shares the same brain and body, who might have once been the age of the parts, but now is a strong, caring adult, committed to creating a life different from the past. Safe, nourishing, relational. In Chapter 11, Safety and Welcome, the experience of earned secure attachment, we address integration, not as a goal or treatment, but as a process that occurs organically when we use mindfulness-based techniques to bring awareness and compassion to the system of traumatized parts. As defined by Daniel Siegel, integration comes from differentiation coupled with linkage. As to bring focused attention to a young part in distress, the client is asked to imagine a young child of the same age with the same emotions in the room, standing right there before you. By bringing the child part inside alive, the therapist facilitates the client's access to right brain-based, inherently compassionate, intuitive responses. Using guided visualization, the therapist evokes images of the child's face, body language, and plight to increase the sense of connection or empathy between child and normal life adult. And the latter is asked to notice, now, and how do you feel toward that part now? Repeatedly, client and part are asked to mentalize the other's mentalization, to notice how one impacts the other, stimulating a felt sense of connection, then enhancing the bond by sharing their responses again and again. Ask the little girl how it feels to hear you say, "I'm glad I'm here." I want her to feel safe. While internal bonds of secure attachment are built through the dyadic interchanges between adult and part, the normal life of self of the client is also asked to repair the distress state of the child or create a new ending to the story of distress, just as secure attachment figures do. Imaginal experiences of healthy, safe attachment can generate the same feelings and sensations and evoke the same attunement bliss that babies and mothers enjoy. And by simply focusing mindfully on these moments, they can be encoded as readily and as concrete as a physical experience of safety and attunement. Chapter 11 stresses again that emotional healing of traumatic wounds have to be attachment-based. Like long-lost young relatives, the alienated, disowned parts must be invited to the table and welcomed into the heart and mind and arms of the client. This process can be very moving for both client and therapist, but it is not without its challenges. The trauma-related fear of self-compassion is strong and unbending, leaving the therapist with the job of holding a calm fear of self-compassion is strong and unbending, blah, 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 without welcoming each and every part home and offering safe, unconditional acceptance. Survivors can't fully heal the wounds left by the failed empathy of the caretakers. I'm going to say caregivers in this one. Caregivers who harmed them or allowed them to be harmed when they were too little, too alone, and too vulnerable to defend themselves. For those clients traumatized as adults, therapists have to be absolutely clear that resolution still depends upon all parts finding safety after trauma. The young parts whose needs were not reliably met in childhood, or who interpreted the traumatic events in the light of insecure attachment, adolescent parts whose fight and flight responses have been reactivated, despairing, submissive parts who took the fall in an inescapable situation, even suicidal parts who would rather turn their swords on themselves rather than be humiliated or abandoned. Dan Siegel's conceptualization of earned secure attachment reflects the belief of many for earned security capitalizes on the brain's ability to grow new neural networks and encode new pleasurable feeling states. By imaginally evoking new implicit memories of safety and attunement, parts feel the inner sensate experience of healthy attachment, moments that can be encoded alongside the painful memories of failed or frightened attachments, changing the ending of the story. Earned security is measured by the degree of coherence exhibited by individuals reflecting on their early attachment relationships on the adult attachment inventory. That is, the degree to which they have integrated the bitter and the sweet of their lives, the pain and then the pleasure in relationships now. Only the human brain can create a new story of safety, closeness, and compassion by evoking states of well-being connected either to imagined or remembered experiences. For neuroplastic brain change to occur, only 3 ingredients are needed. First, clients have to be helped to inhibit their habitual emotional, physical, and cognitive patterns. Next, They have to practice a new pattern with which they'd like to replace the old, and then practice the new pattern over and over again without losing the felt connection to the child and to their own bodies. It could be as simple as bringing the right hand over the heart to communicate calm, or repeating the words, "It's okay now. I'm here now." A client's new healing story might sound a bit like this. Once upon a time, my parts felt as unsafe and unlovable as I did as a child. Now I don't feel anxious that I will be rejected and abandoned, and neither do they. I know I'm okay, and I know they're okay. I feel connected to my parts and to myself, and I'll always be here to keep them safe. They are special to me and will always be. In the appendices that follow Chapter 11, Appendix C presents the internal dialogue protocol that, practiced over and over again, builds the ability to communicate internally, calm and comfort distressed parts, and grow the bonds of compassion. Appendix D presents a treatment paradigm for internal attachment repair. Appendix E consists of a worksheet, the Dissociative Experiences Log, for helping clients increase the ability to track and differentiate the signs of parts activity in communication. And Appendix F provides a script for the 4 befriending questions, a technique that builds inner communication and bonds of love and trust. Psychotherapists have wondered and worried and philosophized for hundreds of years about the nature of healing. This book describes one theory about healing, the effects of trauma and traumatic attachment that emerged from my clinical observations. Healing is the outcome of reversing long-standing patterns of self